Hello, dear YouTube viewers. I hope you're doing well. Okay, so let's start our video. I grew up believing in discipline, routine, and loyalty. My career had shaped me into a man of structure. Early mornings, long hours at the office, and a quiet pride in knowing I was providing for my family. My values were simple yet firm. Honesty mattered more than anything, and I held on to the belief that trust was the foundation of love. That belief guided everything I did, especially in my marriage. I loved my wife deeply, in the way a man loves, with his whole being, without conditions, without reservations. She wasn't just my partner. She was my safe place, the person I thought would always walk beside me through every storm. My days had a rhythm that looked ordinary from the outside, but carried meaning for me. I would wake before the sun, brew my coffee, and watch her still asleep, wrapped in the sheets. Driving to work, I often thought about little surprises I could bring home, flowers, her favorite chocolates, or just a smile when I walked through the door. In the evenings, we would share dinner, laugh about something trivial, and sometimes sit in silence that felt comforting rather than empty. To me, this was happiness, the quiet kind of life I had always wanted. I never needed grand adventures or luxuries. I only needed her by my side. We hadn't met in some extraordinary way, but that made it even more special. It was at a bookstore, of all places. She had been searching for a novel, and I noticed she couldn't reach the top shelf. I offered to help, and when our eyes met, it felt like a spark I couldn't explain. That one moment led to hours of conversation over coffee, then late-night phone calls, then a love that grew so naturally it seemed inevitable. When I proposed, it wasn't just with a ring, it was with the promise that she would never have to doubt my loyalty. She said yes, and in that moment, I thought I had everything I would ever need. The early years of our marriage were golden. We were partners in every sense, sharing jokes, dreams, and even silly arguments that ended in laughter. I remember how she used to run into my arms when I came home from work, as if the hours apart had been unbearable. Weekends were filled with road trips, movies, or simply staying in, wrapped up in each other's company. We had built not just a home, but a world of our own, where trust and joy were the walls that kept us safe. But slowly, almost invisibly, things began to change. At first, it was small. She seemed a little more distracted, a little less present in our conversations. Then she started spending longer on the phone, stepping out of the room or lowering her voice when I was near. At night, she would sit up in bed scrolling endlessly, the glow of her phone lighting her face while I lay beside her, pretending not to notice. There were fewer jokes, fewer spontaneous hugs, and our silences started to feel heavy instead of comforting. I told myself not to overthink it. Marriage goes through phases. I reminded myself. Maybe she was stressed, maybe she needed space, maybe I was imagining it all. I buried my doubts under layers of trust, convincing myself that the woman who once promised me forever could never betray that promise. Yet in the quiet moments, when she smiled at her phone or pulled away from my touch, I felt the first cracks forming in the world I thought was unshakable. That day had begun like any other, with no warning of the storm waiting just beyond the horizon. The weather was mild, the sky a pale gray as though the world itself were undecided, sunlight trying to break through but constantly smothered by drifting clouds. I woke with the familiar rhythm of routine, but something in me felt restless, a heaviness I couldn't quite place. Work had been unusually slow, meetings canceled, deadlines pushed. By noon I had finished everything on my desk, and though my colleagues lingered, I found myself packing up early. Maybe it was instinct, maybe fate pulling me back home before I should have arrived. I didn't question it then. Driving through the streets, I noticed how ordinary everything looked. Children rode bicycles along the sidewalks. A couple walked hand in hand. Shopkeepers swept the entrances of their stores. To anyone else, It was just another afternoon. But inside me, unease stirred. I remember tightening my grip on the steering wheel, wondering why I felt like I was heading toward something unknown. I told myself it was nothing, just the fatigue of routine, just a man going home early to surprise his wife. That was all. When I stepped into the house, it was unusually quiet. The scent of her perfume lingered faintly in the air, mingling with the aroma of fresh coffee she must have made earlier. I closed the door softly, not wanting to startle her, and slipped off my shoes. I expected to hear music, or the faint buzz of the television, or her humming in the kitchen. Instead, silence pressed down, broken only by the faint murmur of her voice. It came from the living room. She was on the phone, her back turned to me, unaware of my presence. I should have called out, announced myself like any husband would. But something about the way she spoke, low, hushed, careful, froze me where I stood. I moved quietly, almost against my will, and found myself standing just behind her, close enough to catch every word, yet far enough to remain unseen. My heart quickened, a drumbeat in my chest. I didn't know why I was hiding, why I was listening. Maybe I already knew. At first, the words were fragments, pieces of sentences carried by the air. I miss you too. No, he doesn't suspect anything. Yes, tonight if I can. My breath caught in my throat. I blinked, convinced I had misheard. But then came the words that cut me open. You make me feel alive in a way he doesn't anymore. With him, it's routine, but with you, it's fire. The ground beneath me seemed to tilt. My ears rang, drowning out the rest of her conversation. The woman I had built my life around, the woman I trusted more than anyone, was speaking of me as though I were nothing but a shadow. My hands trembled, my body numb. I wanted to shout, to demand answers, to shake her until the truth tumbled out of her lips. Yet no sound came. Her laughter floated through the room, light and soft, a sound I once lived for. Now it felt like poison. My mind raced, images flashing like shards of glass. Our wedding day, her smile as she walked down the aisle, the vows we exchanged under the warmth of the sun. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. Were those just words to her? Promises meant to be broken the moment passion faded? Inside me, a war raged. Rage burned hot, telling me to confront her, to expose the betrayal, to let the house echo with the weight of my fury. But heartbreak smothered it, leaving me hollow. Tears threatened, but I swallowed them down, unwilling to give even the air the satisfaction of witnessing my weakness. I thought of the nights she had pulled away from my touch, of the phone that never left her hand, of the way her eyes no longer lingered on mine. It had all been leading here to this moment of truth. And yet, even with the evidence ringing in my ears, I wanted to deny it, to cling to the illusion of the woman I loved. Silence became my shield. I didn't move, didn't breathe until she ended the call. Then, quietly, I turned away. My footsteps were soft against the floor, as though I were a ghost drifting through the halls of a house that no longer belonged to me. I didn't take my keys, my wallet, or even my phone. I wanted nothing from that place, nothing from her. The silence of the house was deafening. It mocked me, filled every corner with echoes of what I had just heard. My heart, on the other hand, roared with noise, shattered promises, unanswered questions, 1,000 cries I couldn't release. Each beat of it was a reminder that the life I thought was mine had already ended without my knowing. When I reached the door, I paused. A part of me wanted to slam it, to let her know that her secret was no longer hidden, to let her flinch, to see her face pale with guilt and fear. But I didn't. I turned the knob slowly, opened the door with the same care I had used when I entered, and stepped outside. The door clicked shut behind me, not a bang, not a warning, just silence. And in that silence, everything I believed in collapsed. The moment I stepped outside, the air hit me like a wave, cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of rain, yet to come. My feet moved without direction, carrying me away from the house, away from her, away from everything that had been my world only minutes before. I didn't know where I was going. I only knew I couldn't stay. Each step felt weighted, but I kept walking, as if distance could dull the echo of her voice replaying in my head. He doesn't suspect anything with you, it's fire. I wandered through the streets of my own city, yet it felt unrecognizable. Neon signs flickered, cars rushed past, people laughed and talked around me, but it all blurred into meaningless noise. I must have looked like a ghost, moving among the living, unseen, and unnoticed. Every face I passed seemed to belong to someone untouched by betrayal, someone who hadn't just lost the very ground beneath their feet. The loneliness was suffocating, not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the kind that comes from realizing the person you trusted most has chosen someone else over you. Her words looped endlessly in my mind, sharp as broken glass. I could still hear the tone of her voice, soft and intimate, a tone I once believed was reserved only for me. I remembered how she used to say my name, how she'd tell me I made her feel safe. Now those memories twisted inside me, poisoned by the knowledge that she was whispering those same promises to someone else. My feet carried me toward the old part of town, almost without me realizing. I ended up near a park where she and I had once walked on our first date. I could still picture it, her hair catching the sunlight, the shy way she laughed at my jokes, the warmth of her hand in mine. That day had felt like the beginning of something eternal. But now, standing there years later, it felt like a cruel illusion. The park was the same, but everything else had changed. Flashbacks assaulted me with no mercy. The day I proposed, her tears of joy as she said yes. Our wedding day, when she walked toward me in white, radiant as though she were made of light. The promises we made, spoken with trembling voices, but absolute faith. For better, for worse. I thought we had meant them. The memory of her running into my arms after a long day, the sound of her laughter filling our little apartment, the quiet mornings spent drinking coffee together. All of it crashed into me like waves. But now, those images were tangled with others. Her sitting up late at night, hiding her smile behind her phone. Her excuses for why she couldn't spend time with me. The distance in her eyes when I tried to hold her. The warmth of the past collided with the coldness of the present. And I was caught in the middle, torn between the love I once knew and the betrayal I could not deny. Who was I now? The question burned inside me. Was I still her husband, or just a man who had been replaced without even knowing it? Was I a fool for believing in her, for building my life around someone who could throw it all away? Or was I simply a stranger now, cast out of a story I thought I was still a part of? Guilt crept in, sharp and insidious. Was I not enough? Maybe I hadn't loved her the right way. Maybe I had been too focused on work, too wrapped up in routine. Maybe I had failed her without realizing. The doubts circled like vultures, pecking at the last remnants of my self-worth. Yet even as those thoughts consumed me, another voice whispered through the chaos. Betrayal says more about her than it does about me. I had been loyal. I had been honest. I had been present. Whatever she was seeking, whatever emptiness she tried to fill with someone else, that was her choice, not my fault. Still, the temptation to return gnawed at me. Part of me wanted to go back, to fling the door open and confront her. I imagined it 100 different ways. I saw myself yelling, demanding answers, shattering the fragile silence with the fury I had swallowed. I saw myself grabbing her phone, exposing every message, every call. I saw myself asking her why he and not me Why lies instead of honesty? In darker moments, I even saw myself forgiving her, begging her to choose me again, to fix what had been broken, but each scenario ended the same, with a hollowness I couldn't escape. None of those imagined confrontations gave me peace. None erased the words I had heard or the truth I now carried inside me. And so I chose silence, not because I was weak, not because I was afraid, but because sometimes silence carries more weight than any shout ever could. I kept walking, the city unfolding endlessly before me, its lights blurring into streaks through the tears I refused to let fall. I didn't know where I would go or what tomorrow would bring. All I knew was that nothing would ever be the same again. Night had fallen by the time I stopped wandering. The city was alive with light, but I felt as though I stood in shadow. I sat on a bench near the waterfront, the air heavy with the scent of salt and the rhythm of waves lapping against the shore. My thoughts circled endlessly, tugging me in two directions, toward the house I had left behind, and toward a future I couldn't yet see. The decision pressed on me like a weight. Should I return, confront her, demand answers? Or should I let the silence remain my answer? Walk away from the ruins without turning back. Each option burned with its own kind of pain. Going back meant facing her eyes, her lies, her excuses, leaving men accepting that the life I had built was gone, that the woman I loved was no longer mine. In the end, I chose the path of separation. There was no fight left in me to battle for what was already broken. Love cannot be begged for, loyalty cannot be forced, and respect cannot be stitched back together once it has been torn apart. I would not return to play the role of the betrayed husband, clinging to a life that had died without me knowing. Instead, I resolved to begin again, not immediately, not easily, but one step at a time. Tomorrow, I would call a lawyer. Tomorrow, I would start the painful process of cutting away the ties that had once held me. The thought was agonizing, but strangely, it brought a sliver of peace. For the first time since I had overheard her voice, I felt a sense of direction. Betrayal had wounded me, yes, but it did not have to define me. My silence, my dignity would be my strength. She had chosen deceit, but I would choose truth, even if that truth meant walking alone. As I stared out at the waves, I found myself speaking inwardly, almost as if confessing to the night. Trust is fragile. I realized easier to break than to build, and impossible to restore once shattered. Betrayal is not only the act of turning away from someone, but of dismantling the very foundation they stand on. Yet, even in the midst of heartbreak, there is a choice to let the betrayal consume you or to let it refine you. I thought of the man I had been that morning, a husband who believed his world was steady, unshakable. That man was gone. In his place stood someone altered, scarred, but perhaps stronger for it. My silence was not cowardice. It was a statement. Sometimes words are wasted on those who have already chosen not to hear. Sometimes walking away is the loudest declaration of all. And so, I rose from the bench, ready to face the long night ahead. I didn't know what healing would look like or how long it would take, but I knew this. I would not let her betrayal become the story of my life. I would write my own ending, one where I carried dignity instead of despair. That night, I walked out without a word, not because I was weak, but because my silence carried the weight of every broken promise. Thanks for watching. For more videos, please subscribe. Our channel, Awesome Visual Story,